There are people who consider that this religion cannot be anything but evil, and that it is simply impossible for there to be average Muslims, for there to be peaceful Muslims, for there to be a reality show that is just as boring and just as plain and simple as every other reality show out there, because it shows Muslims in their daily life. And so because this all-American Muslim reality show depicts the most boring set of people imaginable without showing bombs and terrorism, people get this impression that we're not being fair by showing a set of Muslims that are peaceful. And we have major corporations boycotting the show out of this fear of portraying peaceful Muslims. We have over 22 cases of mosques being prevented to be built in this land. We have over 17 states in our own country that have banned or outlawed the practice of the Sharia, as if somehow the Sharia were a viable, realistic threat. In other lands around the world, we have had the banning of the building of minarets. We have had the banning of Muslim women wearing the burqa and the veil. And the irony of ironies is that these Western lands, these lands of democracy and freedom, they used to pride themselves on allowing individuals to be whoever they are. That was what made the West different from everybody else. That was what differentiated, in the 80s and the 70s, when I grew up in the 70s and 80s, we had this system, you probably haven't heard of it, of dividing the world into first world and second world and third world. You've heard of this tripartite division of the world? And the first world was only those worlds or those lands that gave freedom to their people. And the third worlds were everybody else who didn't give any freedoms to their people. And this part of the world valued itself that yes, we allow our citizens to do as they please, to worship or not to worship, to live whatever lifestyle they like. And this was a value that these countries and societies have fought for over 300 years. Look at the history of this land. Look at the Puritans when they migrated from England to America. The reason they migrated was that they did not want the government to interfere in their rituals and their private lives. And so they fled seeking the freedom to be religious. That's what the Puritans were. They were fundamentalist fanatics. They were religious people, but they didn't want the governments to be involved in their religion. So they fled their lands and they came to this land, seeking those freedoms. Similarly in Europe as well. After Europe was immersed in hundreds of years of civil wars between Protestants and Catholics and between factions of Protestants, the 100-year war, the 30-year war, finally they realized, you know what? The only way forward is to stop fighting over religion and to live and to let live. To let every person worship as he or she chooses to worship. So they fought for these freedoms and they prided themselves on these freedoms. And all of this actually began 800 years ago with that famous document called the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was the very first document, the very first constitution, if you like, even though to call it a constitution is a bit stretching it, but it was the very first uber constitution, if you like, that was applied upon the kings and queens of Europe. And there is a theory that the Magna Carta came out of the interaction of the Crusaders with Muslims. That when the Crusaders returned from Jerusalem and they saw that Muslims had a law in which the Khalifa was also subject to that law, just like the states and the citizens of the state were subject to the law. There was a law higher than the Khalifa. They realized that this was the way forward. And so the Magna Carta came out of this realization that there should be a law that even the kings and queens are subject to. And of the paragraphs of the Magna Carta, and this document is 850 years old, one paragraph in it gives people, and listen to this, we're getting very relevant here. I know you think I'm talking about something very ancient. We're going to fast forward to last week. This Magna Carta document talks about the right of habeas corpus. How many of you know what habeas corpus is? Every one of you should know what habeas corpus is. It is what differentiates, and here's what I am saying this. It is what differentiates a free society from a repressive one. It is what differentiates a democratic society from a tyrannical fascist one. The right of habeas corpus, basically, to be simplistic here, I know some of the lawyers in the room are not going to like this simplicity, but just to get the point across. The right of habeas corpus means that the king, the ruler, the government does not have any right to imprison or execute or confiscate anything belonging to a citizen without due process of law. If the king doesn't like the way you look, that doesn't justify him taking your property. If the king doesn't like you saying something, he can't just lock you up in jail for 20 years, as is the case in many repressive regimes across the world. Even if the president wants to do something, he has to go through a court of law, and there has to be an open and fair process where the person is able to defend himself, and a neutral party will judge between even the president and the citizen. This is the right of habeas corpus, that no one can be detained without a due process of law. And this was the cornerstone of Western society for 850 years. Notice I said this was the cornerstone. Because something happened last week that unfortunately many Muslims completely went under their radar. And it is something that every one of us should be alarmed about, because it signals the beginning of the end of these freedoms that we cherish so much. Last week, our Congress and then our Senate overwhelmingly ratified a new law, and it is now on the President's desk, and every indication is that he is going to sign it, and it is pretty clear he is going to sign it. A new law that allows the President to decide that if an enemy combatant, who might even be a citizen, is deemed to be a terrorist threat, that this person can be detained and questioned and interrogated and imprisoned for an indefinite amount of time, no questions asked. The right of habeas corpus, which was guaranteed in every single Western land for over 800 years, is now going to be diminished and taken away. And you know, when people are willing to give up their own freedoms and their own privileges that they have fought hundreds of years to achieve, just because they don't want us, the other, to enjoy those freedoms, when a group of people are willing to go against their own heritage and their own background and their own values and their own laws merely because they hate another group of people, then wallahi, if this isn't a phobia, I don't know what a phobia is. And this is the essence of Islamophobia. They're so paranoid, they're so crazy, they're willing to go against their own values and begin detaining innocent people, begin assassinating their own citizens without any due process of law.
فيا ذلي ويا خجلي إذا ما قال لي ربي أما استحييته تعصيني ولا تخشى من العتب وتخفي الذنب عن خلقي وتأبى في الهوى قربي فتب مما جنيت عسى تعود إلى